I still remember the exact date, March 2nd, 2021. It was a Wednesday. It was one of those early spring mornings where the sun lies to you, bright but bitterly cold. I had just come home from my shift at the clinic. My feet were aching, and my uniform still smelled faintly of antiseptic and sweat, but I didn't care. I was humming, smiling, because I believed I had a partner, a marriage, a life worth coming home to. But that was the day I opened a letter from the bank. It was addressed to me, Mrs. Elena Morrison, but the inside might as well have been written in blood, a formal notice. Loan amount, $100,000. Current balance, $98,742. Payment overdue. I stood in the hallway, still holding my keys, shoes barely off, rereading the number. $100,000 in my name. My credit, my life, my ruin. I hadn't taken any loan. I hadn't even bought new shoes in 6 months. I called Richard, my husband of 18 years. Straight to voicemail. I didn't panic, not at first. That's the cruel thing about betrayal. It wears the face of someone you love. I thought, he must have made a mistake. A business thing. He'll explain. He always does. By evening, I'd left 4 voicemails, calm at first, then shaky. By the 5th, I didn't recognize my own voice. I texted my sister, Madeline, just to talk. No reply. Odd, but not alarming. She was flighty, a free spirit. She'd always been the wind to my stone. I couldn't sleep that night. My brain was building scenarios I didn't want to believe. Maybe Richard took the loan to surprise me. Some misguided investment. Maybe Maddie was just on a silent retreat again. I'd believed worse things before. Love does that. It makes you a willing fool. The next morning, I called the bank. I gave them my social security number, my date of birth, my everything. They confirmed it. The loan was real. The signature was mine. Except it wasn't. I never sign. Did a thing. But whoever forged it had done it with terrifying precision. My handwriting, my initials, even a copy of my driver's license. The loan had been taken out 4 months ago, December 3rd. Right around the time Richard started saying he was working late. That was the first time my heart really stuttered. I pulled up our joint account online. I hadn't checked it in a while. I trusted him with the finances. He said I worked hard enough. He'd take care of the boring stuff. The balance read, $42,017, all the savings, $68,000, gone. Credit card? Maxed. My retirement fund? Emptied last month. I sat there staring at the screen, mouth open, unable to breathe. I called his office. Richard hasn't worked here since December, the receptionist said flatly. He'd quit 3 months ago, right after taking out the loan. I felt something tear inside me then, not in my body, but in the invisible thread that had tethered my life together. A thread I hadn't even known I was clinging to. I called the police. Fraud, identity theft, financial abuse. But as soon as I gave them the name, one of the officers on the line said something that made my blood go cold. Wait, Morrison? We've got an open case on a Richard Morrison and a Madeline Keene, suspected to be out of state. My knees went weak. They had run off together, my husband and my baby sister. Let me tell you something about Madeline. She was always beautiful. The kind of beauty that men look at for too long and women feel guilty about envying. Chestnut curls, those green eyes like sea glass, the kind of smile that feels like a promise. But she was also chaos. Wild, impulsive. The last time I saw her was Christmas Eve, December 24th. She brought over a bottle of wine, wearing a red velvet dress that fit a little too tight. Richard opened the door, and she laughed in that flirty little way she had. I remember noticing how long they held eye contact, but I shook it off. I blamed my jealousy. She was always magnetic, even with my friends, even with my husband. That night, she gave me a necklace, a dainty gold chain. For the strongest woman I know, she said. That necklace was probably bought with my own stolen money. The police told me they believed the two of them had driven south, a red 2015 Jeep Cherokee, registered under my name, of course. I spent the next few days in a blur. Work? I called in sick. Food? I couldn't keep anything down. Sleep? I'd close my eyes and see Richard's face, smiling as he kissed her. But grief eventually calcifies, turns into something sharper, heavier. By the 5th day, I wasn't crying anymore. I was planning. First, I called my credit union and froze every account. Then, I pulled out every document I had: marriage license, bank records, car title, birth certificate, even an old postcard he wrote me from college. I contacted a lawyer. When I explained everything, she looked at me with a kind of restrained pity. "Do you have any proof he forged your signature? He had access to my ID, my checks, my passwords. He knew everything. But unless you can prove coercion or show evidence that someone else filled out those forms, it may not be enough to hold him criminally liable." I sat there, stunned. So, what, he gets away with it? Not necessarily, but justice will take time. No, I didn't want justice in the legal sense. I wanted consequences. And if the law couldn't give them to me, I'd deliver them myself. It started small. I found the old shared email Richard used for junk subscriptions and online orders. He never changed the password. Inside were dozens of receipts, delivery confirmations, and Airbnb bookings. One in particular caught my eye. 3-week reservation, Carolina Beach, NC. Check-in, March 5th, 3 days after I received the bank letter. So that's where they were. And that's where I'd go. But I wouldn't show up screaming. I wouldn't throw punches or beg for answers. No. I'd play the long game. Because I knew things about Richard. Deep, buried, shameful things that even my sister didn't know. And if they wanted to steal my life, I'd steal theirs back, piece by piece. I packed a bag, bought a burner phone, and drove 12 hours without telling a soul. What I found at that beach house made my skin crawl and gave me the perfect opening to begin my quiet revenge. It took me 12 hours to get to Carolina Beach. I left at 4:15 a.m. in a used gray Camry I'd borrowed from my cousin Hannah. I told her I was taking a few days to clear my head. She hugged me, said I needed it. If she had any idea what I was really doing. The drive was silent, except for the constant thoughts slamming around my skull like shoes in a dryer. Every exit sign, every gas station, every time I passed a happy couple in their car, I clenched the steering wheel tighter. I kept picturing them together. Richard, with that quiet smirk he wore when he thought he'd outsmarted someone. Madeline, tilting her head just so, the way she did when she wanted to be adored. They thought I was soft, predictable. The nurse wife with tired feet and kind eyes who would just accept whatever life handed her. Who would cry, maybe curse, and then move on. They didn't know what I was capable of when everything I built was burned down. The Airbnb was a whitewashed beach house, 2 stories, with peeling blue shutters and a screened porch. I didn't park out front. I left the Camry 3 blocks away and walked. It was March 7th. 2 days after their check-in, early enough that they wouldn't be on high alert. People don't suspect they're being hunted while they're sipping margaritas and sunbathing. The first time I saw them, I almost vomited. They were on the porch, Richard shirtless, Madeline in a robe that used to be mine. I recognized the stitching. E.M. for Elena Morrison. Back when I believed initials meant something. He kissed her neck. She giggled. My hands clenched so hard, my nails broke skin. I stepped back, steadying my breath. Not yet. I wasn't here to scream. I was here to ruin. I found a cheap motel nearby, $54 a night, cash only. It smelled like mildew and cigarette ash, but it had Wi-Fi. I didn't sleep much. I lay on the stiff mattress, scrolling through Richard's email. He'd saved everything. Booking confirmations, even pictures, ones I hadn't seen, ones they must have taken during their little romantic getaways while I was working double shifts. They had a pattern. Every trip had the same charges: liquor store, fancy dinner, pharmacy, always condoms, always in cash. But something new showed up this time, a keylogger subscription. Richard had paid for spyware 2 weeks before he emptied our accounts. He'd been tracking me. My keystrokes, my bank logins, my private emails. He didn't just betray me. He studied me, like a predator. That was the moment I decided. I would become the thing he never saw coming. The next morning, I bought a disposable phone and registered a fake Gmail. I needed a disguise. Not the wig and glasses kind. I needed to become useful to them. I posed as a real estate agent from a luxury firm, used Canva to make a fake flyer, complete with headshot, logo, and fake testimonials. I sent it to Richard's junk mail, knowing he'd check it eventually. Subject line: interested in buying the beach house? Fast cash, no agents, zero fee. I made sure the price was attractive, $420,000 cash offer. Closing in 7 days, no inspections needed. He replied within hours. He used a fake name, Rick Thomas, but the phone number matched one from a delivery receipt I'd seen earlier. They were desperate for money. Good. That would make them careless. I started texting Rick, pretending to be an assistant for a private buyer. I told him we'd need photos of the property and a copy of the lease agreement. He sent both, which gave me 2 things: proof of location and tenancy, his fake identity and forged lease in my name. Now I had leverage, but I wasn't done. On March 10th, I paid a local investigator $500 cash to confirm my suspicions. I asked him to do surveillance for 48 hours. I needed movement logs, deliveries, who came and went. He didn't ask questions, just nodded and said, "Hell hath no fury, huh?" Exactly. On the second night, I got the footage. They weren't just relaxing, they were selling off my jewelry, pieces I inherited from my mother. I watched Madeline hand over my sapphire bracelet to a pawn shop clerk, the one she once cried over because I wouldn't let her borrow it for prom. I took screenshots, timestamps, store names, receipts, evidence. But what I did next? That's when things really started to crack. I contacted the actual owner of the beach house, a retired couple from Wilmington who had no idea someone had faked a lease to rent out their property. I sent them everything: the fake lease, Richard's name, photos of the inside, and my notarized statement. They were horrified and furious. By March 14th, they had contacted the police and their attorney. Richard and Madeline would get a polite knock on the door soon, but I wanted to give them a proper warning shot first, so I texted him from the number he didn't recognize. "Hey, Rick, just curious, do you always forge your wife's signature? Or is this your first time?" 10 minutes later, "Who is this?" I didn't answer, but I did forward a photo. One he hadn't seen in a decade, our wedding day. Me in my lace gown, him in a cheap rented tux, Madeline off to the side, smiling too wide. Underneath it I typed, "You should have picked someone who didn't use the same password for everything." He didn't reply. But by nightfall, they'd checked out of the beach house early, left half their stuff behind, according to the investigator. Good. Let them run. Because I wasn't just chasing them. I was building a fire behind them. One that would spread. I traced their next stop through a trail of pawn shops and gas station charges, but this time, I didn't follow alone. I brought someone with me, someone who owed Richard more than just money. The investigator gave me their next location before sunrise, a cheap motel in Charleston, South Carolina, room 206, paid in cash, but they weren't smart enough to realize pawn shops report large transactions, and they had just sold my mother's gold engagement ring for $3,200. They weren't just thieves, they were clumsy thieves, and clumsy thieves leave trails. Before I drove out again, I made one stop. Dennis. Dennis Langford wasn't a friend. He was one of those names you never expect to see again, an old client of Richard's from back when he was investing in commercial real estate. That was the story Richard told everyone. What he really did was borrow money from men like Dennis and funnel it into risky short-term deals. Sometimes it paid off. More often, it didn't. Dennis had loaned him $50,000 in early 2020. Richard never paid it back. But Dennis wasn't a bank. He was something else. He owned a security company, but everyone in town knew what that meant. Collections, favors, pressure, the kiss, and a guy who got his money back, one way or another. I remembered Dennis because of a dinner party once, years ago. He showed up late, uninvited, and cornered Richard in the kitchen. Richard told me afterward he was just an old contact. I never forgot the way Dennis looked at me, like he already knew how everything would end, so I called him. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, surprised. "Didn't expect to hear from you. I have information about Richard, and I know where he is, with a large amount of cash that belongs to both of us." There was a long pause. Then he said, "Go on." We met at a diner just off I-95. I showed him screenshots, bank activity, and the address of the motel. I didn't ask him to do anything violent. I made that clear. I want him exposed, I said. Humiliated, and I want him scared, but not dead. Dennis chuckled, then sipped his coffee. Not my style anyway. Fear lasts longer than pain. He agreed to help. Not out of kindness, but because I made him a deal. I'd sign over rights to a piece of land Richard bought in my name back in 2019, something he didn't know was still legally tied to me. Market value, about $35,000. Dennis called it a fair trade. So now I wasn't just a scorned wife on a solo mission. I had backup. We reached Charleston on March 15th, checked into the motel next to theirs, room 204. Dennis brought a guy with him, quiet, professional, wore gloves even when handling coffee cups, said his name was Mike. I didn't ask more. That evening we watched from the lot. I saw her first. Madeline stepped out in cut-off shorts and a crop top, holding 2 styrofoam trays of takeout. Her hair was greasy, her skin blotchy. Whatever glow she had in Carolina Beach was gone. Richard followed, limping slightly. That surprised me. Then I noticed the bandages. His left hand was wrapped, clumsily. Poor circulation, maybe. He'd probably ched something or someone out of frustration. Good. They went back into room 206. That night, I slipped a note under their door. No more beaches. No more hiding. I'm coming. I signed it with my name. The reaction was immediate. Less than an hour later, Madeline stormed out alone, keys in hand. She was yelling into her phone. She looked unhinged, like someone whose lies had finally outrun her. Dennis raised an eyebrow. You sure you don't want us to rattle the cage a little more? No, I said. Let them squirm. But I wasn't just playing cat and mouse. I had a real plan. That plan involved a reporter. A local journalist named Stacy Grant had done a series on financial fraud and predatory scams last year. I emailed her with my story. I didn't use my full name at first, but I attached redacted documents, loan notices, forged signatures, the lease agreement, photos of Richard and Madeline pawning jewelry. She replied in 6 minutes. Can we talk? Off record first. We spoke the next morning. I told her everything. Not just the facts, but the emotional unraveling, the betrayal, the identity theft, the incestuous affair. Her silence on the other end of the call was thick. I want to publish, she said. This could go national. Not yet, I told her. Wait for my signal. Because if Richard and Madeline thought public shame was the worst that could happen, they hadn't met the new me. Back at the motel, I finally decided to confront them. Not loud, not angry. Calm, controlled, surgical. On March 17th, at exactly 7:13 p.m., I knocked on their door. Richard opened it halfway, saw me, and froze. The color drained from his face. Elena, he said, voice hoarse. Madeline peeked over his shoulder, mouth open. I smiled. I want to talk, I said. Like adults. Sit down. Let's be civil. Richard tried to act casual. This isn't... Look, we didn't mean for it to. I'm not here to hear your lies. I'm here to make an offer. They let me in. The room smelled like takeout, old cologne, and mildew. She sat on the bed, arms folded. He stayed standing. I sat in the only chair. I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table between us. Here's what's going to happen, I said. They looked at each other. You're going to sign over the Carolina Beach Jeep, the last remaining joint asset, and you're going to make a recorded confession, acknowledging the loan, the forgery, the theft, and the fraud. Madeline scoffed. You're out of your mind. Richard said nothing. If you don't, I continued, I go public. The article is already drafted. The footage, the receipts, all of it, on a Dropbox ready to send to every employer, bank, and loan officer in the country. You'll never rent again, never get a credit card, and your faces will be all over national news. You wouldn't, Richard started. I absolutely would, I said. Madeline stood up, pacing. You don't understand what we went through, how hard he worked, how hard You stole from me, I said slowly, while smiling in my face. Silence. Richard reached for the folder. By the time I left the motel, I had a signed confession, video, and paper. Ownership of the Jeep, Madeline's gold bracelet, the one she used to flaunt at every family event. She offered it back like it was a peace treaty. I took it without a word. Back in room 204, Dennis was waiting. "Well?" he asked. I tossed him the Jeep keys. He grinned. "Guess I got my cut." But I wasn't done yet, because now, with the confession in hand and the Jeep in my name, it was time to go public. The article dropped March 21st, 2021 at 9 a.m. sharp. Front page of the local news site. Woman's husband and sister forge, $100K loan, vanished together. Victim fights back. Stacy didn't pull punches. She used screenshots from the video confession, bank statements, with my permission, and even photos from the beach house and motel. She blurred Madeline's face in the banner image. I didn't ask her to. The headline trended within hours. By noon, it hit regional news. By 5 p.m., Buzz News picked it up. People love betrayal. They love revenge more. My inbox flooded. Messages from women. I went through the same. "Thank you for speaking out. Can you recommend your lawyer?" It was surreal. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a force. Richard and Madeline, though, they were drowning. I don't know what was worse for them, the national attention or the comments, because the comments didn't hold back. "He looks like the kind of guy who steals your Netflix password and your soul. Is it just me, or does the sister look proud of it? Hope she was worth $100K, bro." Every article had their names, their faces, their shame, and best of all, that Jeep, the one I took back, I sold it for $14,000, listed under light cosmetic damage, runs fine. Every dollar went into a new savings account under my name only. I called it Restart Fund. 2 days after the article, I got a phone call from a number I hadn't seen in years. Mrs. Keene, their mother. She and I had always been polite, not close. She'd once called me a bit stiff. I called her classic behind her back. But this call, it was different. "Elena," she said, voice shaky. I don't even know what to say." I didn't reply. "I had no idea," she continued. "Madeline hasn't answered any of my calls. I'm sorry for everything." I exhaled slowly. "I don't need your apology," I said, "but I do have a favor to ask. Anything. Stop protecting her. Stop pretending this was a mistake. She knew. She wanted this." Silence. Then she whispered, "She always wanted what was yours." That landed like a stone in my gut. She knew. On some level, she'd always known. "I'll wire you what I can," she added. "I can't fix this, but I can help." I declined the money, not out of pride, but because what I needed from her wasn't cash, it was truth. And she gave me that. That same week, Richard started emailing me. First it was short, desperate. "Please stop. You're ruining my life." Then, "We can work something out. Just take the article down." Finally, a full letter. He said Madeline was struggling, that they couldn't find work, that no one would rent to them, that her mental health was declining, that he was sorry. I didn't respond. Instead, I sent his email directly to Stacy. She published a follow-up. Update. After exposure, scammer pleads for privacy from woman he financially destroyed. The comments were even worse this time. "Oh, now he wants privacy? Tell your sister to get a job at the pawn shop. Full circle. Let them rot." Every time I thought I might feel pity, I remembered the night I opened that bank letter. The way my stomach dropped, the way my voice shook, the way he never answered. So I leaned in. I started a blog, just a small one. Free. Titled, "The Wife Left Behind." It wasn't about them anymore. It was about the patterns, the red flags I'd ignored. But life has a sense of timing. On April 3rd, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a wedding invitation. I laughed, out loud, alone in my kitchen. The card was thick, expensive, completely tasteless. Rick Matty, private ceremony, RSVP required. I flipped it over. Nothing else. I scanned the code on the RSVP just for curiosity. It linked to a donation page. They were crowdfunding their wedding. I stared at the screen. They had the audacity to ask strangers to pay for a ceremony born from theft and lies. There was a spot to leave public comments. I typed, "You stole $100K and ruined 2 families. The only gift you're getting from me is karma." I hit submit, watched it go live. Then I forwarded the link to Stacy. She ran it as a side column. After scandal, infamous couple seeks donations for wedding. That article got more views than the original. A few days later, I heard from Dennis again. "You know," he said, "Richard's been calling around, desperate to make a deal." "Let him call," I said. "You want me to talk to him?" "No, I want him to sit in that motel room every night, wondering what the hell I'll do next." Dennis chuckled. "You're colder than I expected." "I'm not cold," I said. "I'm just done being polite." By the end of April, the consequences had caught up. They were evicted from their Charleston motel for missed payments. Madeline's car was repoed. Richard was blacklisted from every real estate firm in the region. Their wedding fundraiser? Shut down for fraud after an anonymous report. It wasn't that anonymous. And me? I had started over. A new apartment, modest, clean, all in my name. A new account, with the Restart Fund growing, and a small group of women I now wrote with weekly. My unofficial revenge support circle. 6 months later, I received a letter. Formal, legal, and unexpected. Richer. It was trying to sue me for emotional distress and defamation, but he forgot one thing. I still had his confession, and I wasn't afraid to take him to court. It arrived in a plain white envelope with blue ink and a smudged postmark from North Carolina. A lawsuit filed by Richard Morrison, alleging defamation, character assassination, and emotional distress caused by the article, blog, and social media commentary. I sat at my kitchen table reading it, a mug of black tea cooling by my elbow. For a moment, I just stared, not at the words, at the gall of it. This man stole $100,000 in my name, ran off with my sister, forged legal documents, and left me to drown in debt. And now he felt distressed? I laughed. Sharp, bitter. Then I called my lawyer. His name was Tim Ralston. We'd worked together briefly before, back when I had to fight to get my name off the forged lease. He'd once called Richard's behavior textbook narcissistic fraud. Tim met me at his office the next morning. He flipped through the pages, frowning like he'd found mold in a wedding cake. "He doesn't have a case," he said, finally. "This is smoke. No legal fire." "But he filed it." Tim nodded. "Sure. Sometimes they do that to pressure a retraction or a settlement, hoping you'll blink." "I'm not blinking," I said. "Good," he replied, smiling. "Because we're going to counter." My counterclaim included identity theft, forgery, emotional and financial abuse, fraudulent misrepresentation, unauthorized access to private information, and the cherry on top, defamation. Not his defamation. Mine. Because I still had the video confession, the notarized documents, his text messages, even voice recordings from our marriage counseling sessions where he admitted to financial dishonesty, casually, smugly, like it was all a game. We submitted everything. By the time the court date was set, October 12th, on 2021, the story had resurfaced online again. A journalist from a mid-tier cable network asked to do a segment. I declined the TV spot. I didn't need to be a face. I'd already won where it mattered, but I let them publish the update, with a photo of my hand holding the lawsuit envelope and a headline, "Man who fled with wife's sister tries to sue her. It doesn't go well." Court day. He walked in looking small, not just physically, though he'd clearly lost weight, but spiritually. Like a balloon half deflated and left to sag in a corner. Madeline wasn't with him, probably couldn't face it, or maybe she was too embarrassed to be seen in a courthouse that wasn't offering her a plea deal. He wouldn't look at me. But I looked at him, and I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. The judge was stern, efficient, female. She reviewed the documents with a cool detachment, asked sharp questions, and barely concealed her distaste when Richard's attorney, some tired man with a bad tie, tried to suggest I'd incited online bullying. "Mr. Morrison," she said, voice dry, You admitted to theft, forgery, and financial abuse. Your wife's online expression of those facts is not defamation. It's testimony. He didn't say a word. The judge ruled in my favor. Completely. Richard's claim was dismissed with prejudice. He was ordered to pay $5,000 in legal fees, and as part of the ruling, he was barred from contacting me in any capacity without legal counsel present. The courtroom was quiet when it ended. I walked out without looking back. Outside, on the courthouse steps, I took a long breath. 16 months earlier, I'd stood in my living room holding a loan letter in trembling hands, wondering how the man I loved could do something so monstrous. Now, I stood here, whole. He tried to break me. Instead, I became bulletproof. 3 months later, I moved. A new apartment,